Lisa is Lisa Becking. She's a tropical marine biologist, as you can see, and she's an assistant professor at Wageningen University. She's an expert when it comes to marine research, both in Indonesia, she travels the world, as in the Caribbean part of the kingdom. She writes columns for the Volkskrant, she does interviews for National Geographic, and she's a board member of the prestigious Jonge Academie. That's part of the Koninklijke Nederlandse Academie van Wetenschappen, de KNAW. And since April, Lisa is also a member of the academic board of the KNAW, KITLV. Lisa will take us to the world underwater, and she has a very broad perspective, as we noticed when we went to Wageningen last Monday to film her. She has a very broad perspective on how to combine different disciplines of science in NWO and outside of NWO calls. So her call is also very much for collaboration and having the broad perspective. Maybe we have your attention for Lisa Becking.
Thank you, Tanya. Oh, fine. All right. Well, good afternoon. Well, thanks for that introduction. And so I'm an assistant professor at Wageningen, which means I have sort of the academic perspective, but I'm also a senior researcher at Wageningen Marine Research, where we do a bit more applied research, where we do research in support of nature policy for the Dutch Ministry of LNV, or formerly Economic Affairs, in conjunction with local authorities and institutions. I was asked to give some reflections on, doing research on natural science in the Dutch Caribbean and marine science. So I will give a totally non-comprehensive review and purely subjective. All right. So I have had many adventures in the Dutch Caribbean, namely here also going down to the deep with my scientific partner in crime, Erik Meesters, where here we went down to 200 meters and discovered 15 new species, actually some more, but also discovered some interesting dynamics in the ecosystems, which has now developed more into further research. We've also had a lot of adventures on the Saba Bank. So this is an area that we like to call the largest nature park in the Netherlands. And work here, again, expeditions have been since 2011, and also organized and led mostly by Erik. And what's great about these expeditions is actually that we've been going there for multiple years, getting an idea of the temporal and spatial dynamics of the biodiversity and the ecosystem functioning. But what I also just love about it is that it's a week in which Dutch, well, let's say European Netherlands scientists and Dutch Caribbean scientists come together, as well as always a whole team of students, to really kind of see each other's work and get to know each other and build the trust to move forward. But what I'm going to be talking about a little bit more is sea turtles. So Joseph actually said that I shouldn't talk about science, but I just can't help myself. So I'm going to give a little bit of data. So this is a Dutch project from the first call from the Dutch Caribbean call on the Dutch Caribbean sea turtle ecology and conservation. Now, formerly, Per Polsbol from Groningen, who I thought would be here, maybe not, and Marjolein Christiane from Wageningen, who unfortunately couldn't be here, and I are PIs, but we wrote this project together with a whole team of collaborators from the islands, the different organizations that work with sea turtles. So we had a number of sort of scientific, ecological questions that were open and that were interesting to us. And then we talked with them to try to align it to make certain that it's also relevant for the islands. So what it kind of comes down to is that the Netherlands has adopted national and international legislation to protect sea turtles inhabiting the Dutch Caribbean waters. The problem is that there's quite a lack of fundamental insights in the ecology, the migration routes, the population demographics, and habitat use of the green and hawksbill turtles. And this lack of knowledge also poses quite severe limitations to the implementing of effective management plans for the region. So as a result, we set up quite a integrative study with a lot of different methods, so using genomics, satellite tracking, isotope analysis, and habitat mapping, trying to get to this sort of, at the end, trying to get all the science that's needed to create a science-based management plan. And this project was set up in two sub-projects. So with sub-project 1 looking at habitat use and tracking, and sub-project 2 looking at population genetics. Now, what we first actually did was, there's a lot of information out there, but it was a little bit disparate. It was kind of all over the place. And so we tried to get all the information together on where are the nesting sites and where are the feeding sites, and what are the risks. So a lot of that information was also available in, let's say, the Dutch Caribbean biodiversity database. But there was also a lot of information on the islands that was just never actually like quantified or written down. So, for example, there are beaches where sea turtles come, but just there hasn't been the chance to really monitor these beaches, so we don't actually have numbers. So we put that kind of qualitative data in there as well. Then we also interviewed a lot of people, and from our own observations also tried to sort of identify what are the risks, what are the threats, and what types of threats for each of these different types of habitats. So we're putting all of that together for all the 6 islands. Yes, I forgot to say this project is on all 6 islands. And ultimately we will be giving that to the Dutch Caribbean Biodiversity Database and also put it together in a sort of interactive map. Now, we are still getting everything together. This is sort of the final parts, and we'll have a final symposium in December. But I wanted to show a little bit of information what we found about the migration routes. So sea turtles like to hang out in one area and eat and just live there. And then every so many years, they migrate sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilometers to breed somewhere else. So the sea turtles that breed in Bonaire, we wanted to know, where do they go after they breed? And you can find that out by tracking them. So here's a satellite tracker on their back. And then we throw them back in the sea. And here you see our team is Marjolein, Marjolein Christiane, and Mabel Nava from STCB, and Funchi from STCB. And they put the turtle back. And then we can just, based on their tracks, find out where do they go. And the answer is everywhere. So what that means, though, is so then basically what we find is that they really do some only go distances of 300 kilometers, and now there's up to, thousands of kilometers. And what that means is that they cross the boundaries, the exclusive economic zone boundaries of many different countries, including countries that still have legal harvest of sea turtles or have a lot of bycatch of sea turtles in their fisheries, documented bycatch in their fisheries. And so as a result, that kind of means that either actual harvesting or unintentional harvesting elsewhere in the region will have effects on the populations that are in Bonaire. And seeing as they're also, sea turtles are kind of a part of the tourist experience of Bonaire, that's also something that's relevant for us and possibly should be something that our Dutch government should be talking about in their interactions with these different countries. Now, when we were also interested, just to stay with Bonaire, Bonaire also has a huge foraging aggregation, so an area where sea turtles feed, namely in Lac Bai, and we were interested to know where do they come from. So where did they come from, and then when they want to breed, where do they go? Now, we can't actually track them to find that out because they stay a very long time in their foraging area, but you can figure it out through indirect means, namely through population genetics. Because turtles like to nest in the same place where they, more or less, in the same region where they were born. And so that means that if you go to those areas where, these nesting areas, and you take some DNA, you can kind of get like a genetic signature for that breeding area. And so that's sort of what we have here. We call them haplotypes, but they're kind of like genetic signatures for different rookeries, different areas where sea turtles breed across the Caribbean and the Eastern Atlantic. And you can just kind of look at the colors. So the colors kind of indicate, let's say, the symbol for those different breeding areas. So then we took samples from Bonaire, from Lac, and then analyzed their DNA and compared. What was really cool here is that because of our collaboration with STCB, they already had a huge amount of data. They had been collecting samples from sea turtles actually since 2006. So we were actually really able to see how that aggregation of sea turtles was able to change over time. And yeah, because otherwise with us, with our 5-year program, we wouldn't have been able to see this kind of temporal data. What you see, just very simply here, is that from 2006 until 2016, you see a real shift in the composition of this aggregation, and it's particularly a shift from where from the northwest Atlantic, northwest, pardon me, the northwest Caribbean to the Eastern Atlantic. So, doing some mixed model analysis, we find that, yeah, where the Eastern Atlantic populations used to contribute the most to Lac Baï. So Eastern Atlantic, think of the Guyana, Suriname. That's kind of shifted now to where it's mostly the northwestern Caribbean that contributes the most. So that's sort of the Florida and Cuba and Mexico. What we also then found in our analysis is actually that this reflects the conservation measures in these different regions. You see that the conservation success has been higher up in the northwestern area. The number of nests that are coming there are higher, and in contrast, they're lower in the Guianas. And so it's kind of an interesting thing. This kind of the first time that we've been able to kind of link these two things together. And so this is a paper that Jurjan van der Zee, the PhD that's working in our group, he's dealing with the reviews now and hopefully publishing soon. So all in all, just to give a few sort of, I guess, more conclusive remarks or recommendations based on our research, one thing that's clear, but I guess that was clear from the start, was there's really a need for a sea turtle recovery action plan. This is something that most countries with sea turtles have this. The one that is clearly present is actually from the Dutch Antilles and is from 1992. Some islands still had legal poaching at that time. So clearly a new action plan is needed. Furthermore, also more standardized protocols across the islands. That is something that we've kind of seen and it's recognized, but something kind of needs to change there a little bit in conjunction with continuous monitoring. But all of this can only happen if there's enough staff. I mean, everyone wants to do it, but you need enough people to do it. So you need the dedicated staff. Oh, thank you. So having dedicated staff towards sea turtles, you just see in the organizations that have that, they can just do a lot more. Because basically there's still a lot of baseline data that is necessary to really understand how these animals move and also to understand how we can sort of interact well with them. All right, that brings me to this report. This was it's de staat van de natuur van Caribisch Nederland, de staat van instandhouding. It was finished in 2017, but it wasn't allowed to be published till March this year. And it basically analyzed, very simply put, it's a long report, very simply put, it analyzed the state of the nature in the Caribbean Netherlands. And in a very short conclusion for the coastal systems in the Dutch Caribbean, pardon me, is that the state is not good. It is ongunstig. And as a result, there's been a unanimous support by our government, by the Tweede Kamer, to set up a koraalreddingsplan, a plan to save the corals. And so I'm hoping that also this will also, so there's a lot of things happening as a result of that, but I'm also hoping that there'll be a number of questions that are necessary to do that will be possible through this new Caribbean call. So I was also asked to give a little bit of my ideas on possible issues or thoughts or whatever about doing natural science in the Caribbean Netherlands, or just some points to consider. I'm just going to rephrase this in the sense that, yes, there's a lot is there, but there's still also just some things that are not understood about the ecosystem functioning. And I would say very much this whole interaction between land and sea. I mean, everything that kind of happens on land has effect on the corals and on the different ecosystems along the coast. I also feel, as Tanya said, that in dealing with these major societal and scientific problems, we really do need the perspective of different disciplines, and also both fundamental and applied science. And I hope that the Caribbean call will take that into account. And finally, with that, I hope also that the Caribbean call will be very clear in its objectives. As in the last call, I think I will speak for some natural scientists in that we probably shouldn't have applied, in the sense that the projects that came out were amazing and very necessary. I mean, they were related to education, health, business, but they were all very anthropocentric and very applied. And I think there are a number of us that had done more natural science types and things. Probably just wasn't a call that they should have applied for, which is fine. It's good to know beforehand, not so that you don't waste time. Sorry. I would also like to say that one of the things I've noticed, and this is probably not only the case for natural sciences, but it's the groups that I work with, there's very high transition of people in the organizations, and that does make it sometimes difficult for the continuity of data and protocols and knowledge. And that's not due to any lack of dedication by people. It's just that there has to be the resources for it. So that is something that just I think that will make everything and the whole natural science stronger. Then to get back to a point that Stacey brought, is that I don't see it too much yet for natural sciences, but I can imagine that in the future there may be overlap in projects, and that you're seeing many more players, and there are many more scientists coming in from the Netherlands. I think a lot more people are realizing that these are bijzondere gemeentes, municipalities in the Caribbean, and more people are coming. There are more NGOs, there are more consultancies, there's from the government, and so the numbers are growing. And I'm just wondering how to deal with that, as in, it's great that many people are there, but how can we coordinate that when not everyone's looking at the same coral or are interviewing the same grandma on the corner? So there's that. And then finally, I think also from the conservation perspective, I think there's also more clarity is needed of who's responsible for what. So who's responsible for the monitoring, who's responsible for enforcement, and who's going to develop this long-term vision, because that is definitely needed. But I also want to be positive. And that I feel that, so we've had lots of students in all of our different projects, and I'm certain all of the people who have the Caribbean Call have been had lots of students. And so they're also key partners. And then we've also very much tried to have students from the Dutch Caribbean. There are a couple, at least one there. And that's great, because you often see students come back in their positions elsewhere. But I do sort of wonder where all these amazing students we have from the Dutch Caribbean that are getting a very good education and going on, where do they go after graduation? Because not everyone can really go back. And I don't have a solution, and I don't know if there's a solution here. It's just more something I do think all of us should kind of consider, and possibly in the formation of this grant, that should be a point. Where do you go to avoid the brain drain? On that line, there's been some discussion about possibly a research station or education hub on Bonaire. I mean, I think that's all very much in higher thought process. But I do actually think that something along the lines of CNSI, which is on station, is doing a really good job. Something similar on Bonaire will be quite important too, for doing the research, for education, for outreach. And then finally, when we were setting up this grant, when we were setting up the proposal for the sea turtle grants, I looked at all the websites of all the universities, and I couldn't find a faculty of natural sciences, conservation, or something along that line. And so that was it. Like, we would have loved to have had someone else from the university on that, but it was just the most of the faculties are focused on law and medicine and business and tourism, which I totally get because you need to be functional. But I'm just thinking how, and particularly in line with these new developments, how to work with that. And so in any case, it's super to hear that Aruba is starting sort of a new faculty, or in any case PhD program towards natural science. But yeah, so that's something also I think just something to put out there and to think about, or how maybe universities can work together or work as a dépendance. And on that, if anyone has questions.
Any questions? It may be about the sea turtles or about the brain drain and brain gain. Yes. U, hè? Ja.
Goedemiddag, mijn naam is Hilde Rodriguez. En ik had inderdaad een opmerking. Oh, yes, sorry. I can do it in English. My name is Hilda Rodriguez, and I had a question or a suggestion for the organizing committee. I just reviewed the website of LIFE, that's a program of the European Union, and they gave like a framework for applications. And it helps a lot because then you don't make a report of 10 pages that nobody would read, and that saves a lot of time for the scientists to apply. Although it won't be succeeded.
Framework, yeah. Okay. I see nods from Joseph and Niels. Nods, yes. Anyone for Lisa? Maybe, oh, yeah? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for a beautiful presentation. My name is Josje Brouwer. I'm a research student, PhD student from the University of Amsterdam. I had a question about the sea turtles in relation to the tourism, because I cannot help but think that the tourism must have some impact on the sea turtles. For example, when you go to Curaçao, they usually, the fishermen, they feed the fish to the turtles, so there's a 100% chance for tourists to see turtles there. And also in Bonaire, of course, you see many tourists just snorkel behind the turtles. Did you focus on that as well, and what are your thoughts on that?
So we were already doing quite a lot within the project. So we actually didn't focus on this sort of social interaction, tourism interaction with the sea turtles. I mean, that's a whole field of study. I mean, because it's that weighing the benefit of tourism, because the tourism brings money to do the conservation and also the awareness towards the tipping point where it goes over where the tourism are actually not positive actors. And so, I actually didn't know about Curaçao that they feed turtles for them to come. All right, that's a good point to note. Thanks.
Anyone? Questions, remarks? If not, Lisa will probably be here also during drinks. Yes? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, thank you. Yes.